Outside, the world moved fast. But inside, time felt thick, stuck, like dust on old photographs. "Mr. Moretti," his assistant murmured from the doorway. "The florist just confirmed 3,000 white roses for the anniversary gala, all arranged exactly as you requested." Daniel didn't turn. His reflection in the glass looked polished. Tailored navy suit, silver cufflinks, hair perfectly combed. But his eyes, they were tired. Hollow, almost. "Good," he said, voice low, rough like gravel. "Make sure they're placed near the grand staircase. I want everyone to see them before they see her." A pause. Then, softer, "before they see us." He finally turned. The room behind him was immaculate. Designer furniture, abstract art worth more than most people's lifetimes. A piano no one played. Everything spoke of success. Nothing spoke of warmth. "You really think this is the right thing?" the assistant asked gently, daring to cross the invisible line between professional and personal. Daniel's jaw tightened. "It's been 15 years, Clara. 15 years of silence, of empty rooms, of pretending we're still married when we haven't shared a real conversation since... He couldn't say the name. Not out loud. Not even now. "Since Mateus," Clara finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel flinched. His son's name still carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid apologies. "I can't keep living in a museum of grief," he said, walking toward his desk. He picked up a framed photo, him, Isabel, and their 6-year-old boy on a beach in Trancoso. Sun in their eyes, laughter caught midair. "She turned into a ghost, Clara. Not angry, not bitter, just gone. Like she folded herself into the walls, so I wouldn't have to see her pain." "And you?" Clara asked, folding her arms. "Did you ever ask what she needed, or did you just decide for her?" He didn't answer. Instead, he set the photo face down on the desk. "I'm introducing Larissa tonight," he said firmly, as if saying it louder would make it truer. "After 15 years of stagnation, I deserve happiness. A future. Someone who looks at me like I'm still alive." Clara hesitated. "And if Isabel shows up," a dry laugh escaped him. "She won't. She hasn't left that house in months. Besides..." He glanced toward the window again, where the city lights blinked like distant stars. "She stopped caring a long time ago." But even as he said it, a sliver of doubt cut through his certainty. Because deep down, in the quietest corner of his heart, he remembered the way Isabel used to hold his hand when he had nightmares. The way she'd hum old Brazilian lullabies while folding laundry. The way she'd plant marigolds every spring, just because Mateus had once said they looked like little sons. She hadn't stopped caring. He'd buried his grief in boardrooms and deals, in late nights and newer, younger distractions. And somewhere along the way, he'd convinced himself that Isabel's quiet strength was indifference. Now, standing in his palace of glass and steel, Daniel Moretti wasn't sure what he was celebrating tonight. An anniversary or an escape. The clock on the wall ticked. 7 hours until the gala. 7 hours until he would stand beside Larissa, bright, eager, unaware of the ghost in his past, and declare a new beginning. And 7 hours until the woman he'd called poor Isabel might just walk through those doors. Not as a victim, but as the only person who ever truly saw him. He took a slow sip of whiskey. It burned, but not as much as the truth. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for desenvolve. Mi conti sobrio topico tu com dialogo como su fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com muita moco. Com muitos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters 4:04 a.m. in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of São Paulo, where the roar of the city faded into the rustle of jacaranda trees and the distant chime of church bells. Isabel Moretti sat on the edge of her bed, folding a simple white blouse with hands that moved like they remembered every stitch of her life. The house around her wasn't grand. No marble floors, no staff, no chandeliers. Just sun-bleached walls, shelves lined with well-worn books, and the soft scent of lemon verbena from the garden she tended every morning. She wasn't poor, not in the way the world meant it. But in the eyes of Daniel's glittering circle, she might as well have been. No designer gowns, no Instagrammable brunches, no presents at charity galas, just silence. And silence in their world was poverty of the soul. A knock came at the door. Soft, familiar. "I say you in," came a warm, aged voice. She smiled faintly. "Come in, Dona Marta." The elderly neighbor stepped inside, holding a small clay pot with blooming gardenias. "Thought you might like these. They remind me of your mother's. She always said flowers heal faster than words." Isabel took the pot, her fingers brushing the petals gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll put them by the window." Dona Marta lingered, her eyes scanning Isabel's face. The gentle hollows under her eyes, the way her hair was pulled back in a loose braid. No makeup, just skin and truth. "You know, the gala's tonight." Isabel's hands stilled. She didn't look up. "I know. He's going to introduce that girl. Isn't he that assistant of his?" Isabel exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath she'd held for months. "Her name is Larissa. She's young, bright, everything I haven't been in a long time." "You've been here, I say," Dona Marta said firmly, stepping closer. "While he built towers, you held the ground. While he ran from pain, you stayed with it. That's not weakness. That's courage." Isabel finally looked up, eyes glistening but dry. "Courage doesn't stop people from leaving, Dona Marta." And he left long before he walked out the door. She rose and walked to the small closet, opening it to reveal a single evening dress hanging at the back. Ivory silk, slightly faded, bought for their 10th anniversary. The last time they danced together. The last time Daniel had looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. "I keep it," she said softly. "Not because I hope for something, but because I refuse to forget who I was before grief reshaped me." Dona Marta touched her arm. "Will you go tonight?" Isabel turned to the window. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed her small memorial garden, where a stone angel stood beside a plaque engraved with the name Mateus Moretti, 2010 to 2019. "Our little son." Every morning, she watered the marigolds planted around it. Every evening, she sat on the bench and read him a page from The Little Prince. She never spoke of him in public. But in this garden, he was alive. In her voice, in her silence. "I don't belong in that world anymore," she said. "But maybe I owe it to myself to stand in that room one last time. Not to fight, not to beg, just to be seen, as I am. Not as the poor wife, not as the ghost of his past, but as Isabel, the woman who loved him through hell and never asked for applause." Dona Marta nodded slowly, tears in her own eyes. "Then wear the dress." Isabel touched the fabric again. Felt like memory, like skin. Later that evening, as she stood before the mirror, fastening a single pearl earring, Mateus had given it to her on his last birthday, saying, "Mama, you're my pearl." She whispered to her reflection, "You don't need their approval to be whole." The city lights flickered in the distance. Somewhere, Daniel was preparing to erase her from his story. But Isabel knew the truth: some stories don't end. They wait. And sometimes, just showing up is the most powerful sentence of all. She picked up her small clutch, took one last look at the garden through the window, and stepped out into the dusk. Dignity in her spine, sorrow in her heart, and a quiet, unshakable grace in every step. The taxi waited outside. The gala awaited. At the center of it all stood Daniel, back straight, smile practiced, arm draped possessively around Larissa's waist. She wore a gown the color of midnight, diamonds at her throat, eyes wide with the thrill of being seen. Chosen by a man the world called untouchable. "He really did all this for us," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly as guests nodded in their direction. Daniel gave a tight smile. "For closure and new beginnings." He raised his glass, the signal for silence. The room stilled, breaths held, phones discreetly raised. This was the moment he'd rehearsed in his head for weeks. 15 years ago, he began, voice smooth as poured velvet. I made a vow. I believed it would last forever. But life has a way of rewriting our stories. He glanced at Larissa, who blushed and squeezed his arm. Some chapters end not with anger, but with quiet acceptance. And from that acceptance, new love can bloom. A ripple of polite applause. Cameras flashed. I'm honored to stand here tonight, he continued. Not just to mark time, but to introduce the woman who's shown me that my heart still beats, Larissa Almeida. Another round of applause, louder this time. Larissa beamed, tears glistening. She leaned into him, whispering, "You're so brave, Daniel." But Daniel didn't feel brave. He felt exposed. Because in that sea of approving faces, his eyes kept scanning the entrance. A flicker of doubt gnawed at him. What if she comes not because he feared her rage, but because he feared her silence? The way she could look at him and see not the tycoon, not the man on magazine covers, but the father who stopped crying when their son was buried. The husband who stopped coming home long before he packed a suitcase. He took a slow sip of champagne, the bubbles sharp on his tongue. She won't come. She hasn't left that house in months. As if summoned by the thought, the double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. A hush fell. Not sudden, but creeping like frost across glass. Conversation stuttered. Glasses paused midair. And there she was, Isabel. She didn't stride in like a storm. She simply appeared, wearing that ivory dress. Slightly faded, yes, but held with such grace it seemed to glow. No jewelry but one pearl earring. Hair pulled back, face bare, eyes clear as still water. She didn't look around for sympathy or shock. She walked forward with the quiet certainty of someone who had already lost everything and found peace in the losing. The room parted for her not out of respect, but out of stunned disbelief. Daniel's breath caught. His glass tilted. Champagne spilled over his cuff. Larissa noticed his stillness. "What is it?" She turned, and her smile vanished. Who is that?" Daniel couldn't speak. His throat had turned to stone. Isabel stopped 10 feet from the stage. She met his eyes, not with accusation, not with tears, just presence. And in that single gaze, Daniel saw everything he'd buried. The nights she sat alone in Mateus's room, the way she saved his favorite coffee cup even after he stopped drinking at home, the letter he never opened. Larissa gripped his arm tighter. "Daniel, should we say something?" He swallowed hard. "No," he managed. "Let her speak." But Isabel didn't speak. Not yet. She simply stood, a single figure of quiet dignity in a room built on performance. The contrast was unbearable. And then, slowly, she stepped forward, just one step, and said, voice low but carrying like a bell through the silence, "Parabéns pelo seu novo comigo. Congratulations on your new beginning." A pause. The entire room seemed to lean in. "Espero que ele sea mais honesto que o anterior." "I hope it's more honest than the last one." Gasps. A few murmurs. Someone dropped a napkin. Larissa stiffened. Does she still think you're married?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't take his eyes off Isabel. There was no malice in her words, only sorrow, refined by years into something almost holy. A woman near the front whispered to her friend, "They say she lives like a nun now, gives all her money away, never complains?" Another replied, "Poor thing, look at her, like she walked out of another century." But Isabel heard none of it. She'd said what she came to say. Now she turned not in retreat, but in release. Daniel's heart hammered. "Wait!" The word tore from him before he could stop it. Isabel paused at the door, hand on the brass handle. She didn't turn back. "Isabel?" His voice cracked. "Why did you come?" She was silent for a long moment. Then, without looking at him, she said softly, "To remind you and myself that love doesn't vanish just because you stop naming it." And with that, she stepped out into the night. The room remained frozen. Larissa stared at Daniel, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. "You never told me she was like that." Daniel finally looked down at her, really looked, and for the first time he saw not the woman he thought would save him, but a mirror of his own escape. The gala music started again, hesitant, awkward. But the celebration was already over. Because in those few seconds, Daniel hadn't just seen his wife, barely felt her. His mind was racing, not with panic, but with something far more dangerous: memory. He saw Isabel's back as she disappeared through the doors, not fleeing, but walking with the quiet certainty of someone who had already said everything that mattered. And in that moment, the carefully constructed narrative he'd told himself for years began to crack. I didn't know she'd come," he muttered, more to himself than to Larissa. Larissa turned to him, her voice tight. "You never told me she was still present in your life." "She hasn't been," he said quickly. "Too quickly." "Not really. We've been separated for months. She lives in that old house, barely speaks to anyone." "Then why did she come tonight?" Larissa pressed, her eyes searching his face. "And why did she look at you like she knew you better than I ever will?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down he knew Isabel did know him better. She knew the man who cried in the shower after Mateus's funeral. The man who kept his son's tiny soccer jersey folded in the top drawer of his dresser. The man who stopped believing he deserved joy. He'd buried that man beneath mergers, press conferences, and late-night texts with women who didn't ask about his past. "I thought I was moving forward," he said quietly, almost to the air. "I thought she had moved on too." A waiter passed by, offering canapes. Daniel waved him off. His stomach churned. Larissa stepped back slightly, her confidence fraying at the edges. "Daniel, do you still love her?" The question hung between them like a blade. He opened his mouth, ready to say no, to reaffirm his choice, to salvage the evening and his new future. But the word wouldn't come, because in truth he didn't know what love was anymore. Was it comfort, was it distraction, or was it the quiet hand that held yours in the dark, even when you refused to speak? "I don't know," he admitted, voice raw. "But I do know this: I haven't been honest. Not with you, not with myself, and certainly not with her." Larissa's eyes filled with tears, not of anger, but of realization. "I thought I was saving you," she whispered. "But maybe I was just helping you run." Before he could respond, she gently removed her hand from his arm. "I can't be the woman you use to forget your past, Daniel. I want to be the woman you choose when you've faced it." And with that, she turned and walked away, not dramatically, but with quiet dignity, leaving him standing alone in the center of his glittering lie. The music swelled again, too loud now, too false. Guests avoided his gaze. Someone laughed nervously near the bar. The gala continued, but Daniel was no longer part of it. He was adrift in the wreckage of his own making. He walked to the balcony, needing air, needing space from the suffocating perfume of pretense. Outside, the night was cool, the city sprawling below like a map of all the places he'd been, and none he'd truly belonged to. He leaned against the railing, forehead pressing into the cold stone. Why did she come? Not to ruin the night, not to beg, but to remind him of something he tried to erase: that their love hadn't died. It had been abandoned, and in that abandonment, he'd mistaken silence for surrender. A soft voice behind him made him turn. It was Clara, his assistant, the only one who dared follow him out. "She left this," Clara said, holding out a small envelope. "She asked me to give it to you, only if you looked like you needed it." Daniel stared at the envelope. Plain white paper, his name written in Isabel's familiar, looping script, the same hand that had scribbled grocery lists, birthday notes, and once, on a hospital notepad, "I'm here. I'll never leave." His hands shook as he took it. "Do you think she knew this would happen?" Clara asked softly. Daniel let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "She always knew, long before I did." He opened the envelope slowly, as if it might burn him. Inside was not a letter, but a photograph. Him, Isabel, and Mateus, on the beach in Trancoso, exactly as he'd remembered it in his penthouse. But on the back, written in fresh ink, just hours ago, were 3 words: "You're still ours. Not mine, not yours, ours." As if love wasn't something lost, but something waiting to be remembered. Daniel's vision blurred. He didn't cry, not yet, but something inside him cracked open, not with pain, but with possibility. Because for the first time in years, he didn't see Isabel as the ghost of his past. He saw her as the compass to his future. And somewhere out there, in the quiet of that old house with its marigolds and memories, she was still tending the garden, waiting not for him to return, but for him to remember. The city lights blinked below like distant stars. And Daniel Moretti, the tycoon who owned everything but peace, finally now only silence remained. And silence, for Isabel, was not emptiness. It was sanctuary. She walked up the path to her small house, the gravel soft beneath her worn leather flats. The garden greeted her first marigolds glowing faintly in the moonlight, their orange petals closed for the night like sleeping hands. The stone angel stood sentinel beside Mateus's plaque, its wings dusted with dew. She knelt, not in prayer, but in presence. "I saw him tonight," she whispered, fingertips brushing the cool stone. He looked lost, even in all that light. A breeze stirred the jacaranda leaves above, scattering a few violet petals onto her lap. She smiled faintly. Mateus had always loved when the flowers fell like confetti. She rose slowly, her ivory dress catching on a low rosemary bush, just a thread pulled loose. She didn't mind. Nothing here needed to be perfect, only real. Inside, the house breathed with quiet warmth. A single lamp glowed in the living room. The kettle on the stove, left on low by Dona Marta earlier, still held warmth. Isabel poured herself tea chamomile, the way she used to make it for Daniel when his insomnia kept him pacing the halls. She sat at the kitchen table, the pearl earring still in place. The other one, its twin, rested in a small box beside Mateus's baby shoes, preserved in glass. She never wore just one, but tonight she had, because tonight wasn't about wholeness. It was about witness. A soft knock startled her. Not the brisk rap of a neighbor, but something hesitant. Familiar. Her heart skipped. No, can't be. She walked to the door, peered through the peephole, and froze. Daniel stood on her porch, not in his tailored suit, but in a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled, hair tousled by the wind. No car idling at the curb. No security detail. Just him. Alone. In the dark. And in his hands, he held the photograph. She didn't open the door right away. Instead, she leaned her forehead against the cool wood, eyes closed, breathing deep. "Why now after all this silence, Isabel?" His voice came through the door, hoarse, stripped bare. "I know I don't deserve to be here, but I needed to see you. Not the woman they called poor. Not the ghost I made you into. Just you." She pressed a hand to her chest, as if to steady the sudden flutter there. "You left," she said, voice low but clear through the wood. "You walked out on us long before you moved out." "I know," he said. "I thought I was protecting myself, but I was just punishing you for surviving, for staying when I couldn't." A long pause. Crickets sang in the garden. Somewhere a dog barked. "Why did you come to the gala?" he asked softly. She opened the door. "Not all the way, just enough. To remind you that love doesn't vanish when you stop feeding it," she said, eyes meeting his. "It waits, in the quiet, in the garden, in the letter you never read." His breath hitched. "I found it, the letter. You read it tonight, after you left. It said you never stopped loving me, even when I stopped showing up." Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. "I wrote it the night you moved your things out. I left it on your pillow. You never came back to get it. I was ashamed," he admitted, voice breaking. "I thought if I pretended the pain didn't exist, it would go away. But all I did was leave you to carry it alone." Isabel stepped back, opening the door fully. "Come in." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I'm not offering forgiveness, Daniel. I'm offering truth. And you can't handle the truth if you're still hiding." He stepped inside. The house smelled of earth, old books, and chamomile. Nothing expensive. Everything alive. He looked around, taking in the framed drawings Mateus had made. The hand-stitched quilt on the sofa, the shelf of journals Isabel had kept since she was a girl. This wasn't a house of lack. It was a house of choice. You gave up everything, he said quietly. The penthouse, the trips, the security. I gave up a performance, she corrected. Not my life. After Mateus, I didn't want a life built on appearances. I wanted one built on meaning. He turned to her, eyes searching. And if I asked you to, give me a chance, not to go back but to start over honestly, would you say yes? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the window, looking out at the garden. Do you know why I plant marigolds every spring? She asked. Because Mateus loved them, he said. Yes, but also because they bloom even in poor soil. Even when no one watches. They don't need applause. They just grow. She faced him again. If you're here because you miss the comfort of having a wife, go home. If you're here because you're lonely, go find someone who'll fill the silence. But if you're here because you're ready to tend to the garden, to the grief, to the love that never really died, then stay. He swallowed hard. I don't know how. Then learn, she said gently. Start by sitting with me. In the quiet. No speeches. No grand gestures. Just be here. He nodded slowly, took off his shoes by the door, something he hadn't done in years, and sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped like a man praying. Was different tonight. I kept your favorite mug, she said suddenly, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's eyes lifted to hers, startled. The blue one with the chip on the handle, she nodded. You always said it felt right in your hands. I left it behind, he said, shame coloring his voice. Like I left everything that mattered. You left your things, she corrected gently. But you couldn't leave the memories. They followed you, just like they followed me. A long pause. The clock on the wall ticked. Slow, patient. Why didn't you ever fight for us, he asked, the question raw, like he'd held it in for years. You just disappeared into this house. Let everyone think you were broken. Let me think you didn't care. Isabel looked down at her hands. Calloused from gardening, ink-stained from journaling, steady despite the storm inside. I didn't disappear, she said. I chose to stop performing grief for people who didn't understand it. You wanted to move on like Mateus was a wound to be stitched shut. I wanted to carry him like a light. There was no middle ground. She met his eyes again. And as for fighting, I fought every single day. Not with you, with myself. Every morning I woke up and asked, how do I love a man who won't let me see his pain? How do I hold someone who's turned his heart into a locked room? Daniel flinched. I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself, she said softly. And in doing so, you abandoned me in the one place I needed you most. The truth. He set the cup down, his hands trembling slightly. I saw the photo you left with Clara. You're still ours. What did you mean by that? Isabel stood and walked to the bookshelf. She pulled down a small wooden box, aged, polished by time. She opened it and took out a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. This is the letter you never read, she said, handing it to him. I wrote it the night you told me you were moving out. I said I'd wait. Not because I expected you to come back, but because love doesn't switch off like a light. It dims, but it never dies completely. Not when it's real. Daniel took it with reverence, as if it might dissolve in his hands. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was familiar, graceful, looping. The same hand that used to leave notes in his briefcase, don't forget your umbrella. I made your favorite soup. I love you even when you're quiet. He read aloud, voice cracking. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means you finally came back to the place where your heart remembers how to beat. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm just telling you I never stopped loving you. Not the tycoon. Not the man the world sees. The boy who cried when our son took his first step. The man who held me when I lost my mother. That man is still in there. And if he ever wants to come home, the door is never locked. Tears spilled down his cheeks, silent, heavy. I thought you'd given up on me, he whispered. I gave up on pretending, she said. There's a difference. He looked at her, really looked, past the simple dress, past the quiet demeanor, into the eyes of the woman who had loved him through fire and never asked for a medal. "What do we do now?" he asked. Isabel walked to the window again, gazing at the garden bathed in moonlight. "Tomorrow morning, I'll plant new marigolds. The soil needs turning. It's hard work. Slow. No cameras. No applause." She turned back to him. "If you're still here at sunrise, you can help me." He didn't say yes. He didn't need to. Instead, he stood, walked to the coat rack by the door, and hung up his jacket. Then he went to the kitchen, found the spare toothbrush she kept in the drawer, still wrapped in cellophane, and filled a glass of water. He didn't speak, didn't make promises. He simply stayed. And in that quiet act of presence, more powerful than any vow, Isabel felt something stir in her chest. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope. Outside, the first hint of dawn brushed the horizon. He turned his head. Isabel was already outside. She knelt in the garden, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands deep in the earth, turning over the soil with a small trowel. Her hair was loose, catching the early light like spun copper. Around her, the marigolds from last season lay wilted, honored, not discarded. He watched her for a long moment, struck by how ordinary she looked, and yet how sacred. Careful not to startle her, he stepped onto the porch, barefoot, the wood cool beneath his feet. "You're still here," she said without looking up. "I said I would be," he replied. "You didn't say it, but you stayed." He walked to the edge of the garden, hesitant. "What do I do?" She pointed to a clay pot filled with young marigold seedlings, their stems delicate but strong. "Those need planting, 6 inches apart. Roots down deep, they like to feel anchored." He knelt beside her, the damp earth cool against his knees. He'd signed billion-real contracts with less reverence than he felt now, handling those tiny green lives. They worked in silence for a while, digging, planting, patting the soil gently around each stem. No grand declarations, no apologies repeated like mantras, just hands in the dirt, side by side. Then, softly, Isabel spoke. "Do you remember the first time we planted marigolds together?" Daniel paused, trowel in hand. Mateus was 3. He got dirt in his hair and laughed for an hour. "He said they looked like tiny suns," she added, a faint smile touching her lips. "And that, if we planted enough, we could never be sad again." Daniel's throat tightened. "I forgot that." "No," she said gently. "You just buried it under everything else." He looked at her then, not as the poor wife the world pitied, but as the woman who had held their family together when he'd fallen apart. The woman who hadn't screamed when he left, but had kept loving in the only way left to her quietly, faithfully, in the soil and in the silence. "I don't know how to be the man you remember," he admitted, voice rough. "I've become someone else. People don't become strangers overnight," she said, brushing soil from her hands. "They just forget who they were. But memory is like roots. It stays, even when you can't see it." He stared at the freshly planted marigolds, rows of green hope pushing through brown earth. "What if I fail again? What if you don't?" she countered. He looked up at her, searching her face for anger, for conditions, for the kind of love that demands perfection. But all he found was calm, and something deeper, trust, not that he wouldn't hurt her, but that he was finally willing to try not to. A bird sang from the jacaranda. The sun climbed higher. Then, from the driveway, the crunch of tires. They both turned. A black sedan slowed to a stop. The window rolled down. It was Larissa. She stepped out, not in a gown this time, but in a simple linen dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup, eyes red-rimmed but clear. Daniel stood slowly, heart pounding. "Larissa, what are you doing here?" She walked toward them, stopping a few feet away. She didn't look at him first. She looked at Isabel, and nodded, almost reverently. "I came to apologize," Larissa said, voice steady. "Not to you," she added, glancing at Daniel, "but to her." Isabel rose, wiping her hands on her apron. "To me, yes." Larissa took a breath. "Last night, I saw you, and I realized I'd been blind. I thought love was about being chosen. But you showed me it's about being true. Even when no one sees it. Even when it costs you everything. She turned to Daniel. I thought I was helping you heal. But I was just helping you run. And that's not love. That's escape. Then to Isabel, I'm sorry I ever made you feel like your love wasn't enough. It was his fear that wasn't enough. Not your heart. Isabel's eyes softened. You don't owe me an apology. You're young. You're learning. That's brave. Larissa managed a small smile. I'm stepping down from my role. I need to find my own story, not live in someone else's shadow. Daniel nodded slowly. I understand. There was no bitterness, no drama, just clarity. As Larissa turned to leave, she paused. For what it's worth, I hope you two find your way back. Not to what you were, but to what you can be. Then she got into her car and drove away. Silence returned, but it felt different now. Lighter. Isabel looked at Daniel. You let her go. I didn't let her go, he said. I finally saw her for who she was, and who I wasn't ready to be for her. Isabel knelt again, resuming her work. After a moment, Daniel knelt beside her. This time, their shoulders touched. And in that simple contact, in the shared breath, the sun on their backs, the earth beneath their knees, something unspoken passed between them. Not a promise of forever, but a promise to try. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't a grand gesture or a public deed, then a rustle of movement from inside the house. The front door opened. Dona Marta stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes wide behind her wire-rimmed glasses. She'd brought groceries, an old habit, but froze at the sight before her. Meu Deus? She whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. You're both here? Isabel looked up, smiling faintly. Bom dia, Dona Marta. Daniel stood slowly, brushing dirt from his trousers. Good morning. Dona Marta stepped forward, her gaze shifting between them, lingering on the way Daniel's sleeves were rolled, on the shared trowel on the ground, on the quiet ease in Isabel's posture that hadn't been there in years. I wasn't sure you'd stay, she admitted to Daniel, voice soft but steady. I wasn't sure either, he said honestly. Dona Marta set the grocery bag down on the porch and walked into the garden, kneeling beside Isabel without asking. She picked up a seedling and planted it with the practiced hands of someone who'd grown life from nothing her whole life. You know, she said, voice low but carrying. After Mateus, I used to watch her from my window every evening. She'd sit right there, she pointed to the wooden bench beneath the jacaranda, and just hold that little soccer ball of his, sometimes for hours, never crying, just holding. Daniel's breath caught. He remembered that ball. He'd tucked it into his suitcase when he left, unable to face it. It sat in the back of his closet to this day. I thought she was breaking, Dona Marta continued, but she wasn't. She was building a place where his memory could live without suffocating her. And she did it alone. Isabel reached over and gently covered Dona Marta's hand with her own. I wasn't alone. You brought soup every Tuesday. You sat with me when I couldn't speak. You never told me to move on. Dona Marta sniffed, blinking fast. Some wounds don't need closing. They need tending. Then she looked at Daniel, really looked. Eyes sharp but not unkind. You hurt her, deeply. Not with shouting. With absence. I know, he said, voice thick. And I can't undo that. But I'm here now. Not because I expect forgiveness, but because I finally understand what I walked away from. Dona Marta studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow nod, she handed him another seedling. Then plant something worth staying for. He took it, and as he knelt again, pressing the tiny roots into the earth, Isabel spoke, soft, almost to herself. There's something I never told you, she said, not looking at him. Daniel stilled. What is it? She paused, trowel hovering above the soil. After you left, I found out I was pregnant. The world stopped. Daniel's head snapped toward her. What? It was early. Only 6 weeks. I hadn't even told you. And then, I lost it. Alone. In this house. On a Tuesday night. Her voice didn't break, but her hands trembled. I didn't call you. I didn't think you'd come. And even if you had, I wasn't sure you'd stay. Daniel felt like the ground had opened beneath him. His chest ached. A deep, ancient pain he hadn't known was waiting. All this time, he whispered. You carried that too. I carried everything, she said quietly. Because someone had to. He dropped the trowel, reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. I'm so sorry, he said, tears spilling freely now. I wasn't there. For Mateus. For you. For us. Isabel finally looked at him, eyes glistening but strong. You're here now. That's what matters. Dona Marta quietly excused herself, slipping back into the house to give them space. But not before placing a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder, a silent seal of witness. They sat on the bench then, not speaking for a long time. The garden breathed around them, birds, breeze, the soft rustle of leaves. Then Daniel said, voice raw, If we ever try again, I don't mean just staying. I mean building. What would that look like? Isabel leaned her head against his shoulder. Lightly, tentatively, like testing if the world would allow it. It would look like this, she said. Showing up. Even when it's hard. Even when you're afraid. Tending the garden. Even when the flowers haven't bloomed yet. He wrapped an arm around her, careful, as if she might dissolve. She didn't. And in that embrace, born not of passion, but of shared sorrow and quiet inside the house, the phone rang. Isabel didn't move. She'd long stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize. But it rang again, and again, insistent. Daniel glanced toward the door. Should I? Before she could answer, Dona Marta appeared in the doorway, holding the cordless phone with a furrowed brow. It's Clara, she said. She says it's urgent. Isabel's breath hitched almost imperceptibly. She took the phone. Clara, Isabel, came the assistant's voice, strained but composed. I'm sorry to call, but there's been a leak. A leak! The guest list from last night's gala. Someone recorded Daniel's speech, and your entrance has gone viral. News outlets are calling you the silent wife who shattered a tycoon's fairy tale. Your name is everywhere. Isabel closed her eyes. Of course it was. What are they saying? She asked quietly. That you're destitute. That you showed up to beg. That you humiliated him with a dramatic exit. One blog even claimed you were mentally unstable, living in isolation since your son's death. Daniel stood now, his face tight with fury. Give me the phone. Isabel handed it to him without a word. Clara, he said, voice low and steely. Pull every press access. Freeze all media partnerships with outlets running those stories. Issue a statement today that anyone who misrepresents my wife will be held legally and morally accountable. And get my lawyers on it within the hour. Daniel, Clara hesitated. The board is already calling. They're worried about your image. My image, he let out a bitter laugh. My image was built on a lie. Let it burn. He handed the phone back to Dona Marta, who set it gently on the side table before retreating inside, leaving them alone again. Isabel looked at him, her expression unreadable. You didn't have to do that. I needed to, he said. I let them paint you as poor for years, poor in spirit, in status, in relevance. But you were never poor, Isabel. You were rich in the one thing I forgot how to value: truth. She turned her face toward the garden, where the newly planted marigolds swayed slightly in the breeze. They'll twist it anyway. They always do. Then let them twist, he said, sitting beside her again, closer this time. But I won't let them erase you again. Not from my story. Not from the world's. A long pause. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and blooming gardenias. Do you remember the last time we were photographed together? She asked suddenly. At Mateus's school play, he said without hesitation. You wore that yellow dress. He played a sunflower. You cried the whole time. I cried because you were there, she whispered. Because for the first time in months, you looked at us like we were your whole world. He reached for her hand. This time, she laced her fingers through his. I'm not asking for cameras, she said. I don't want headlines. I just I need to know you're not doing this because of guilt, or because the world saw you fail. He turned to her, eyes raw with sincerity. I'm doing this because last night, when you walked into that room, you didn't come to destroy me. You came to remind me, and in that reminder, I saw the man I used to be. The one who loved you before he learned to hide. He squeezed her hand. I don't want to be the tycoon who lost his soul to success. I want to be the man who comes home to you, even if home is just this bench. Even if it's just dirt under our nails and silence between our words. Isabel's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. It's enough, she said. More than enough. Just then, a notification chimed from Daniel's phone, left on the porch railing. He ignored it, but it chimed again, and again. Curious, he picked it up. His face went pale. What is it? Isabel asked. He showed her the screen. It was a message from Larissa. I just saw the footage. The way she walked in. The way you looked at her. I understand now. You never stopped loving her. You just forgot how to say it. Don't waste another second. And Daniel, thank you for letting me go before I became someone I wouldn't recognize. Below it, a news alert flashed. Moretti Enterprises CEO cancels all public appearances indefinitely. Sources say he's reassessing priorities. Isabel looked at him. What will you do? He switched off his phone and slipped it into his pocket. I'll do what I should have done 15 years ago, he said, standing and offering her his hand. I'll choose you, not as my past, but as my future. She took his hand, and as they walked toward the house, together, step by step, the world outside buzzed with speculation, with rumors, with headlines trying to define them. But inside that quiet garden, none of it mattered. Potatoes, chopping onions, moving in a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar, like a song half remembered from childhood. The house smelled of garlic, thyme, and the faint wood smoke from the old stove Isabel still preferred over the fancy induction range Daniel had installed years ago and never used. No staff, no chef, just them, and the quiet. Then the doorbell rang. They both froze. Isabel wiped her hands on her apron, eyes flicking to the window. Who would come now? Daniel's shoulders tensed. Maybe another reporter. But when she opened the door, it wasn't a journalist with a microphone or a photographer with a telephoto lens. It was Clara. She stood on the porch, not in her usual sharp suit, but in soft linen pants and a simple blouse, her hair loose, briefcase in hand, but not the sleek corporate one. An old leather satchel Daniel hadn't seen in years. Clara, Isabel said, surprised. I know I shouldn't be here, Clara said, voice steady but eyes glistening. But I couldn't send this by email or courier. It needed to be handed to you, both. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and placed the satchel on the dining table. From it, she pulled out a thick manila envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed with brittle tape. This was in Mateus's school locker, she said quietly. The school kept it, forgotten after everything. They were cleaning out old records last month and found it. Addressed to Mom and Dad. Isabel's breath caught. Her hand flew to her mouth. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. Clara opened the envelope carefully, as if handling sacred text, and handed them a small stack of folded papers tied with a faded blue ribbon, the same color as Mateus's favorite soccer jersey. Isabel untied it with trembling fingers. On top was a drawing, a stick figure family. 2 tall ones, 1 small, holding hands under a giant yellow sun. Beneath it, in wobbly child's handwriting, my family. I love them forever. Below it, a letter, not typed, not dictated, written by a child trying to be grown. Dear Mama and Papa, today we learned about love in school. Miss Lucia said love is when you stay even when it's hard. I asked if Papa loves us and she said yes, because he comes to my games. But you didn't come last week, Papa. Are you still loving us? Mama says you're busy saving people with your buildings. But I miss you. Can you build a house in my heart too? Mama cries sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping. I hold Mr. Bear extra tight so she doesn't feel alone. I promise I'll be brave so you both can rest. Love forever. Mateus. Isabel collapsed into the nearest chair, the paper clutched to her chest, silent tears streaming down her face. Daniel sank to his knees beside her, his entire body shaking. "I didn't know," he choked out. "I didn't know he felt that way. I thought working harder would protect you both. That money, security, legacy, that would be enough." "It was never about money," Isabel whispered, voice breaking. "He just wanted you present. Not perfect. Just there." Clara stood quietly by the door, tears on her own cheeks. "He wrote this the week before he got sick. The school never mailed it. They thought you'd get it at the funeral. But in the chaos, it was lost." Daniel reached for Isabel's hand, but she pulled away, not in anger, but in grief too deep for touch. "I read this letter every night after you left," she said, voice hollow. "I kept it in my pillowcase. I used to whisper to him, 'Your papa will come back. He just needs time.' But time didn't bring you back. It almost took you from me forever." Daniel bowed his head, forehead nearly touching the floor. "I failed him, and I failed you." "You failed yourself," she said softly. "You were so afraid of your own pain. You abandoned the people who loved you through it." He looked up at her, eyes raw, stripped bare. Can I still fix this?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, walked to the living room, and returned with a small wooden box, the one that held Mateus's baby shoes and the single pearl earring. From it, she took a second earring, its twin, and put it on. Then she knelt in front of Daniel, took his face in her hands, and looked deep into his eyes. "You can't fix the past," she said, "but you can honor it every day, by showing up, by remembering him, by loving me, not as the woman you left, but as the one who stayed." He covered her hands with his own, his tears falling onto their joined fingers. "I will," he vowed, voice cracking. "Not for the world, not for redemption, but because I finally see what I walked away from, and I never want to lose it again." Clara quietly slipped out, closing the door behind her, leaving them alone with the letter, the drawing, and the ghost of a little boy who just wanted his family together. Outside, the first stars appeared. Inside, a new kind of love began. Not the kind that shouts from balconies or dazzles quiet nights. Daniel sat on the floor beside the sofa, back against the worn cushion, staring at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something less piercing. But they didn't. They stayed true, honest, a child's plea wrapped in crayon and courage. Isabel stood at the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the moon ripple across the garden pond they built the summer Mateus turned 5. "He used to say the moon was his night light," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "That as long as it shone, he wasn't alone." Daniel didn't answer right away. He was still trapped in the memory of that missed game, the one Mateus wrote about. He'd been in Dubai, closing a deal worth $500 million, convinced he was securing their future. But in that moment, he realized his son hadn't wanted a future. He'd wanted him. Now, "I thought I was building something for him," Daniel said, voice rough with regret. "A legacy, a name, security." Isabel turned, her eyes glistening in the low light. "He didn't need your name. He needed your hands holding his when he was afraid of thunder. He needed you at his bedtime. He needed you present, not prosperous." She walked slowly toward him, stopping just out of reach. "You weren't absent because you didn't love us, Daniel. You were absent because you didn't know how to carry grief. And instead of letting us carry it with you, you locked us out." He looked up at her, eyes burning. "I thought if I kept moving, the pain would stay behind. But grief doesn't chase you," she said softly. "It waits, and it grows heavier when you ignore it." A long silence. The clock ticked. Somewhere, a night bird called. Then Daniel stood, not to leave, not to defend, but to face. He walked to the hallway closet, the one Isabel had never emptied, and opened it. Inside hung his old coat, a pair of Mateus's tiny rain boots, and a dusty box labeled school. He pulled it down. Isabel's breath caught. "You kept that." "I couldn't throw it away," he admitted. "But I couldn't open it either." He sat cross-legged on the floor and lifted the lid. Inside were report cards, finger paintings, a clay sculpture of a dog that looked more like a potato, and a tiny notebook filled with Mateus's attempts at writing stories. One page read, "The brave papa who fought the dragon of sadness." Daniel's hands shook as he held it. He saw me as a hero, even when I was hiding. Isabel knelt beside him, shoulder brushing his. He loved you unconditionally, not because you were perfect, but because you were his. Daniel turned to her, tears streaming freely now. Do you think he'd forgive me?" Isabel placed a hand on his cheek, her thumb brushing away a tear. "He already did. The moment he wrote that letter, he was giving you a chance. He just didn't live long enough to see you take it." Daniel closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man coming in from a long, cold exile. "What do we do with all this love?" he whispered. "It's still here. It never left. We honor it," she said. "We don't bury it in silence. We speak his name. We laugh at his silly jokes. We keep planting marigolds. And we live in a way that would make him proud, not of our success, but of our kindness." She stood, offering him her hand again. "Tomorrow I'm going to the school. I want to donate a little library in his name. Books about stars and dragons and brave papas." Daniel took her hand and rose. "I'll go with you." She searched his face. "Are you sure it'll be hard?" "I've spent years running from hard," he said. "I'm ready to walk into it with you." They stood there in the dim light, surrounded by the quiet relics of a love that had never died, only been misplaced. Then, Isabel did something unexpected. She walked to the piano in the corner, the one Daniel hadn't touched in over a decade, and lifted the cover. She sat, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. Not a grand sonata, just a simple lullaby, the one she used to sing to Mateus. Daniel stood behind her, resting his hands gently on her shoulders. He didn't know the notes, but he knew the feeling. And as the music filled the house, soft, trembling, alive, he bent down and kissed the top of her head. No words, no promises, just presence. Because sometimes, the most powerful healing isn't found in speeches or grand. They both turned. It was Dona Marta again, this time holding a small wooden chest she'd carried from her own home, her arms trembling slightly under its weight. "I found this in my attic last week," she said, voice hushed, reverent. "I was going to give it to you years ago, Isabel, but I thought it might hurt too much." Isabel rose slowly. "What is it?" Dona Marta set the chest on the coffee table, the same table where Mateus's letter lay. She opened the lid with care, as if unveiling something sacred. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a collection of letters. Dozens of them, all in Isabel's handwriting, all sealed, all addressed to Daniel. Isabel's breath stopped. "You wrote one every week for a year after Mateus passed," Dona Marta explained gently. "You'd leave them in the mailbox of your old penthouse, even after he moved out. You never knew, he never collected them. The building staff gave them to me, thinking I'd return them, but I couldn't. Not when you were so raw. So I kept them safe." Daniel stared at the box like it held fire and salvation in the same breath. "You wrote to me," he whispered, voice cracking. Isabel didn't answer. She picked up the top letter, dated just 3 days after Daniel left, and turned it over in her hands, her fingers tracing the ink that had faded but never vanished. "I didn't know what else to do," she finally said, eyes distant. "You wouldn't answer calls, wouldn't open emails. So I wrote about the dreams I had of Mateus, about the way the garden bloomed without him, about how I still set a place for you at dinner, just in case you changed your mind." She looked at Daniel now, tears welling but not falling. "I stopped after a year. I realized you weren't coming back for my words. You were waiting for someone else to save you." Daniel reached into the box with trembling hands and pulled out a letter. He opened it carefully, as though it might dissolve. "Daniel, today I found your old scarf in the laundry. I held it for an hour. Still smelled like your cologne. I know you think I've moved on because I don't beg, but silence isn't surrender. It's just love with nowhere to go." He read it aloud, his voice breaking on the last sentence. He grabbed another, Mateus's favorite tree lost a branch in the storm. I couldn't bring myself to cut it. I tied a ribbon around it instead. Sometimes healing isn't about fixing. It's about honoring the break. And another, I saw your photo in the paper today. You look tired. I hope you're sleeping. I still make your tea the way you like it, 2 sugars, a splash of milk. Habit, I guess. Or hope. With each letter, Daniel's composure crumbled further. He sank to his knees beside the box, tears streaming, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I never knew, he choked out. All this time, you were still reaching for me. I never stopped, Isabel said softly. I just stopped expecting you to reach back. He looked up at her, eyes shattered. Why didn't you tell me about these? Because by the time I realized you might be ready, I wasn't sure I still wanted you to come back as the man who ran, she admitted. I needed you to return as the man who stayed. He stood, clutching one of the letters to his chest like a lifeline. Let me read them all, every single one. Then stay, she said. Not just tonight. Stay long enough to hear everything I couldn't say when you were gone. He nodded fiercely. I will. Dona Marta quietly slipped away, leaving them alone with the ghosts and the grace of what had been lost, and what might still be found. Daniel carried the box to the sofa and sat, opening letter after letter, reading each one aloud as Isabel listened, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling at memories long buried. And as the night deepened, something extraordinary happened. Not in grand declarations, but in the quiet unfolding of truth. The man who had introduced a new love at his anniversary wasn't erasing his past anymore. He was finally reading it, heart cracked open like a seed finally given rain. Isabel had fallen asleep on the sofa, wrapped in the old quilt Mateus used to drag from room to room. She looked peaceful for the first time in years. Daniel stood quietly, not wanting to wake her, and stepped into the kitchen to make coffee. Just as he used to, before everything fell apart. 2 mugs, 2 sugars in hers, black for him. He moved slowly, reverently, as if every gesture might rebuild a bridge between then and now. Then a sound, a rustle of paper. He turned. Isabel was awake, standing in the hallway, but she wasn't looking at him. She was holding an old leather folio, the kind used for legal documents. Her expression was unreadable. You kept this too, she asked, voice quiet. Daniel frowned. What is it? She walked to the table and laid the folio down. It's the deed to the foundation, the one in my family's name. Daniel blinked. Your family had a foundation, Isabel nodded, opening the folio to reveal crisp documents stamped with official seals. My grandfather built it. My mother ran it until she passed. When we married, I never told you, because I didn't want you to think I needed your money, or that I was with you for status. She pointed to a signature at the bottom of a page, hers, dated months after their wedding. I transferred full control to a trust. All assets, stocks, real estate, overseas accounts were liquidated anonymously over the last decade. The foundation now funds pediatric hospitals, grief counseling for families who've lost children, and education for underprivileged girls. Daniel stared at the numbers. His breath caught. Isabel, this is enormous. You're not poor, she finished softly, a sad smile touching her lips. No, Daniel, I was never poor. I chose to live simply because after Mateus, luxury felt like betrayal. How could I wear designer gowns when mothers in favelas couldn't afford medicine for their feverish children? She looked out the window at the garden. Every marigold I plant, it's part of a program. We teach kids to grow food in urban spaces. We call it Little Sons. Mateus would have loved that name. Daniel stepped closer, awe and shame warring inside him. All this time, while the world called you the poor wife, you were quietly changing lives. I didn't do it for praise, she said. I did it because love doesn't stop when your own heart breaks. It expands. It finds others who are broken too. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant song of a thrush. Then, Daniel did something unexpected. He walked to the hallway closet and returned with his briefcase, the sleek, titanium one he used for board meetings. He opened it and pulled out a checkbook, tore out a blank check, placed it on the table. "Write whatever amount you need," he said, "for the foundation, for the schools, for every child who needs a light." Isabel didn't touch it. "I don't want your money, Daniel." "Then take my hands," he said, voice thick. "Let me help, not as a tycoon, not as a donor, as your partner." She studied him, really studied him, the way she used to, before grief made them strangers. "You'd step back from your empire," she asked. "You'd trade boardrooms for community gardens. If that's where healing lives." "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I spent years building towers that touched the sky but had no soul. Now I want to build something that touches hearts." Isabel finally took the check, not to write a number, but to fold it slowly and tuck it into the folio. "I don't need your wealth," she said gently, "but I would welcome your presence. If you're ready to serve, not lead." He nodded. "I am." Just then, her phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from the foundation's director. She read it aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "The new Little Sun Center in the North Zone opens next week." The children made a mural. They painted 3 figures under a big yellow sun. They said, "This is Mama Isabel, Papa Daniel, and our angel Mateus." Daniel's eyes filled instantly. They know about me." "You've been absent," Isabel said, touching his arm. "But you've never been forgotten. Not by them. Not by me." He pulled her into his arms then, not with possession but with surrender. "Let me stand beside you at that opening. Not as your husband, not yet, but as someone trying to deserve you." She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of a heart finally learning to love without armor. Oho'd been touched by her quiet generosity. He didn't speak much. He listened. He watched. He learned. And then, on the 4th morning, as they sat on the porch sharing black coffee and silence, Isabel handed him a small key. "It's the storage unit behind the old bookstore on Rua Augusta," she said. "I've kept it for years. I never opened it after everything." Daniel turned the key in his palm. It was cold, worn smooth by time. "What's inside?" "My past," she said simply. "And maybe your future." He didn't ask more. He just nodded and left after breakfast, returning hours later with a wooden crate under his arm and dust in his hair. He set it gently on the living room floor, his expression unreadable. Isabel knelt beside him as he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of photo albums, some faded, some pristine. Alongside a small film projector, reels labeled in Mateus's handwriting, "Our Summer," "Papa's Office Day," "Beach Fun," but beneath them, tucked in a sealed envelope, was something else. Daniel pulled it out with trembling fingers. It was a legal document. "Last Will and Testament of Elisa Montero," he read aloud, voice hushed. "Beneficiary Isabel Moretti, sole heir to the Montero estate, including properties in Lisbon, Rio, and the coastal vineyard in Minas." Isabel's eyes filled. "My mother left it all to me, on the condition I use it for good, not for show. I sold the Lisbon flat anonymously. The vineyard, it funds the foundation's art therapy program." Daniel looked at her, stunned. "You could have lived like royalty. You chose this quiet life, on purpose." "I chose truth," she said. "After Mateus, I didn't want a life built on appearances. I wanted one built on meaning. And meaning doesn't glitter, Daniel. It grows in soil, in silence, in service." He reached into the crate again and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside lay a pair of antique pearl earrings, perfect matches to the single one Isabel always wore. "They were my mother's," she whispered. "She gave them to me on my wedding day. I lost one the night Mateus. The night he—" She couldn't finish. Daniel held them gently. "You kept the other because you were still married. In your heart." She nodded, tears spilling. "Even when you left, I never stopped believing love could return." He stood, walked to the piano, and opened the sheet music drawer. From the very back, he pulled out a small notebook. "I kept this too," he said, voice rough. Every night after I left, I wrote one sentence. Just one. About you. About him. About the life I ruined. He flipped it open. Today I saw a woman with Isabel's walk. My chest ached for an hour. Mateus's birthday. I drove past the school. Didn't stop. I bought her favorite tea. Drank it alone. I dreamt he called me Papa again. Woke up crying like a child. Isabel took the notebook, her fingers tracing his handwriting. Once sharp and hurried, now softer, slower, as if grief had taught his hands humility. You never stopped loving us, she said, looking up at him. I never stopped missing you, he corrected. But love requires presence. And I wasn't present. She stood, placed the pearl earrings on the table and walked to the window. The garden was in full sun now, bees buzzing around the marigolds. Then be present now, she said without turning. Not for redemption, not for headlines, but because you finally see what matters. He stepped up behind her, close enough to feel her warmth but not touching. What happens next, Isabel? She turned to him, eyes clear, calm, and full of a hope that had been buried but never dead. Next, she said, we open the Little Sun Center together. You meet the children. You hear their stories. You let them paint your hands with suns and stars. And if, after all that, you still want to stay, we'll talk about us. He nodded slowly. And if I don't know how to be with people if I'm still broken, then we'll be broken together, she said softly. But we'll tend the garden anyway. A knock came at the door. It was Clara, this time without papers, without urgency. Just a small smile and a thermos in her hand. I brought tea, she said. The kind you both like. Daniel opened the door wide. And as Clara stepped inside, filling the room with warmth and quiet loyalty, Daniel looked at Isabel. And for the first time in years, he didn't see the woman he'd lost. He saw the woman who'd been waiting, not in silence, but in strength. And as the three of them sat around the kitchen table, steam rising from their cups, sunlight spilling across old photos and open hearts, the future didn't feel like a distant promise. On the dresser, the wedding ring lay in a small dish. She hadn't worn it in years. Daniel stood in the doorway, freshly shaved, wearing a plain white shirt and dark trousers. No tie, no cufflinks, no emblem of empire. Just a man, present, nervous, real. You look radiant, he said, his voice softer than usual. Isabel didn't turn. I'm not doing this for you, Daniel. I'm doing it for them. For Mateus. For every child who's lost someone and needs to know they're not alone. I know, he said, stepping inside. And I'm not here to reclaim you. I'm here to stand beside you, if you'll let me. She finally faced him. Her eyes searched his, not for grand declarations, but for consistency, for truth. You've been here for 2 weeks, she said. You've washed dishes, folded laundry, sat with grieving mothers at the center. You even let little Anna paint your hand with glitter glue. A faint smile touched her lips. But today, it's different. They'll call you her husband again. The cameras will come. The world will try to turn this into a fairy tale. I don't want a fairy tale, he said firmly. I want honesty, even if it's messy, even if it's slow. She walked to the dresser, picked up the ring and held it in her palm. The gold caught the light, warm and familiar. 15 years ago, I put this on your finger because I believed in forever, she said quietly. Then life happened, grief happened, and we got lost. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. If I give this back to you today, it won't mean we're fixed. It'll mean we're willing to try, together, not as the people we were, but as the people we've become. Daniel's breath hitched. Are you giving it back? She walked toward him, slow, deliberate. Then, instead of handing him the ring, she opened his palm and placed it gently in his hand, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. Keep it, she said, not as a promise of the past, but as a choice for the future. Wear it when you're ready to say you're mine, not because of a title, but because your heart is finally home. He closed his fingers around the ring, his eyes burning. What if I'm not ready today? Then keep it in your pocket, she said gently. and carry it until you are. Outside, a car honked. Clara, waiting to drive them to the center. Isabel picked up her woven bag, checked the mirror one last time, and turned to leave. Daniel followed, the ring warm in his fist. As they stepped out into the sunlight, a local news van pulled up across the street. A reporter jumped out, microphone in hand. Mr. Moretti. Isabel, is it true you're reconciling? Is this a second chance at love? Daniel stopped. Instinctively, he stepped slightly in front of Isabel. Not to shield her, but to honor her silence. But before he could speak, Isabel placed a hand on his arm and stepped forward. We're not here for love stories, she said, calm but firm. We're here for children who've lost theirs. If you want to cover something real, come inside. See how hope grows in the quiet. The reporter blinked, then nodded slowly. I will. Daniel looked at Isabel, awe in his eyes. You still do that, he murmured. You turn noise into meaning. She gave him a small, tired smile. Someone has to. Inside the van, Clara watched them through the rearview mirror. Two souls walking side by side, not holding hands, but aligned. In purpose. At the center, children had already gathered, their laughter spilling from the open doors. A mural stretched across the front wall, 3 figures under a blazing yellow sun. 2 tall, 1 small, all holding hands. Beneath it, painted in bright letters, love stays. Daniel's throat tightened. Isabel squeezed his elbow lightly. Ready, he looked at the ring in his hand. Then at the mural. Then at her. I've never been more ready for anything in my life, he said. And together, they walked toward the entrance. Not as tycoon and poor wife. Not as ghosts of a broken past. But as 2 people choosing, one quiet step at a donor's snapping photos with smiling kids. This was presence. Warm, messy, alive. Isabel moved among the children like she belonged to them. Kneeling to tie a shoelace. Reading a story with dramatic voices. Her hands never still, always giving, always receiving. Then, a small hand tugged at Daniel's sleeve. He looked down. It was Anna, the girl who'd painted his hand with glitter glue. She held up a drawing, a tall man with kind eyes, a woman with long hair, and a little boy with wings, all standing in a garden full of yellow flowers. This is you, she said, pointing to the man. And this is her. She pointed to Isabel. And that's Mateus. He watches us from the sun. Daniel's voice vanished. He crouched to her level, eyes burning. You know about Mateus? Anna nodded solemnly. Isabel told us. She says grief is love with nowhere to go. So we plant it, and it grows into flowers. He couldn't speak. He just pulled her into a gentle hug, his shoulders shaking. Isabel watched from across the room, her heart swelling. She walked over slowly. You okay? She asked softly. He stood, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I didn't think I deserved to be in a picture like this. You don't deserve it, she said gently. You choose it. Every day. Just then, a woman approached, mid-40s, worn but dignified, holding the hand of a quiet boy. She recognized Isabel immediately and pulled her into a tight embrace. Thank you, the woman whispered, tears in her eyes. My son hasn't spoken since his sister, since the accident. But yesterday he drew a sun. He said, Isabel says the sun holds everyone who's gone. For the first time in months. He smiled. Isabel hugged her back. He's not alone. None of you are. Daniel watched, humbled. This was Isabel's world. Not built on wealth, but on witnessing. On holding space for pain without trying to fix it. Later, as the children gathered for the mural unveiling ceremony, a soft voice came over the small sound system. Before we begin, said the foundation's director, a letter has arrived from someone who followed your story. All eyes turned. The director read aloud, her voice trembling slightly, to Isabel and Daniel. I watched the gala footage. I saw her walk in. I saw him break. And I realized I'd been chasing a dream that wasn't mine. I'm writing from a small village in Bahia, where I've started teaching art to children who've lost everything. I finally understand love isn't about being chosen. It's about choosing to see. Thank you for showing me that. With gratitude, Larissa. A quiet hush fell over the room. Isabel looked at Daniel. She found her own son. He nodded, throat tight. We all do. When we stop running. After the ceremony, as guests milled about and children ran through the garden outside, Daniel found Isabel on the back porch, watching the horizon. You were right, he said, joining her. This isn't a fairy tale. It's better. It's real. She leaned against the railing, arms crossed. Real means it can still break. I know, he said, but real also means we get to mend it together. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring. He didn't put it on. He just held it in his palm, letting the sun catch its curve. I wore it today, he said quietly, under my shirt, against my chest, like a secret I was finally ready to carry. Isabel turned to him, eyes searching. Why now? Because today, when Anna hugged me, I didn't feel like a tycoon. I didn't feel like a failure. I just felt human. And for the first time, that was enough. She stepped closer. Are you sure it's me you want, not the idea of redemption, not the ghost of who we were? He cupped her face gently. No grand gesture, just tenderness. I want the woman who plants marigolds in broken soil, who writes letters no one reads but still believes in love, who shows up, even when the world calls her poor, and changes lives without needing a spotlight. His thumb brushed her cheek. I don't want the past, Isabel. I want the future. With you, however long it takes. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Then, slowly, she reached into her own pocket and pulled out a second ring. The one she'd kept all these years, hidden in a book of poetry. I wore mine today too, she whispered. Not on my finger, but close to my heart. He didn't ask for her hand. He simply opened his palm, and she placed her ring next to his. 2 circles. One choice. Behind them, the children's laughter rose like birdsong. The mural glowed in the afternoon light. And the garden, once a place of grief, now bloomed with little suns, tended by hands that had learned to love through loss. Then, on a rain-washed Sunday, Daniel woke before dawn with a restlessness in his chest. He dressed quietly, slipped on his worn sneakers, and walked the familiar path. Not to the city, not to a boardroom, but to the place he'd avoided for too long. The old house. Not Isabel's modest home, but their first home. The sprawling estate on the hill where Mateus had taken his first steps, where Isabel had painted the nursery walls herself, where laughter once echoed through marble halls. The gates were locked, ivy curling around the iron like nature reclaiming what pride had abandoned. But Daniel had kept the key. He always had. Inside, dust danced in the shafts of pale morning light. The furniture was covered in white sheets, ghostly and still. Everything was as they'd left it, frozen in the moment grief had turned them into strangers. He walked through the room slowly, fingertips brushing surfaces, memories rising like mist. The kitchen, where Isabel used to hum while making pancakes on Sundays. The study, where he'd worked late, too often ignoring the soft knock on the door. The hallway, where Mateus would race his toy cars, giggling as they zoomed past Daniel's feet. And then the garden. Not Isabel's quiet sanctuary, but their garden, the one they'd planted together the spring Mateus turned 4. Roses, lavender, and, tucked in the far corner, a single marigold patch, long overgrown but stubbornly alive. Daniel knelt in the wet grass, rain misting his hair, and began to clear the weeds with bare hands. He didn't call staff, didn't order a renovation crew. He just dug. Hours passed. Mud streaked his arms. His shirt clung to his back. But with every pull of root, every smoothing of soil, something inside him softened. Daniel, he looked up. Isabel stood at the edge of the garden, umbrella in hand, eyes wide with surprise. You came here, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I had to, he said, standing slowly. This is where I stopped being your husband. Maybe it's where I can start again. She stepped closer, lowering the umbrella. Rain kissed her cheeks. You cleaned it, she said, taking in the cleared earth, the raked paths, the tenderly pruned rose bushes. "I wanted to bring you here," he admitted. "Not to relive the past, but to say I see what I abandoned, and I want to rebuild it with you, on our terms." She looked around, her eyes lingering on the marigolds. "You remembered." "I remember everything now," he said. "Even the things I tried to forget." A silence settled between them, filled only by the soft patter of rain. Then Isabel walked to the center of the garden, where a stone bench sat beneath the old jacaranda, just like the one at her house. She sat. After a moment, Daniel joined her. "I used to come here after you left," she said quietly. "Just to sit. I never entered the house. But I'd sit on this bench and talk to Mateus. Tell him you'd come back. That you'd remember." She turned to him, eyes glistening. "Did you remember what? That love doesn't vanish. It waits." He took her hand, cold from the rain, but alive in his. "I'm here, Isabel. Not because I'm fixed, but because I finally understand the man I was trying to become was already here, with you, in this garden." She leaned her head on his shoulder, just as she had that first morning after the gala. And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of wet earth and blooming memory, the past didn't haunt them. It held them, because sometimes healing doesn't happen in grand gestures or public declarations. Freshly turned soil of the old garden, the one Daniel had spent weeks restoring, not to erase the past, but to honor it. Roses bloomed where weeds once choked. Lavender swayed in the breeze. And in the center of it all, a new marigold patch, vibrant and full, stretched toward the sun like tiny hands reaching for grace. Daniel stood by the jacaranda tree, wearing the same white shirt he'd worn the day Isabel returned to his life. Not pristine, but lived in, sleeves rolled, heart open. In his hands he held not flowers, not jewelry, but a young sapling. Its roots wrapped in burlap, its branches slender but strong. He didn't know if she'd come, but he planted it anyway. Kneeling in the earth, he dug a careful hole, just deep enough. He placed the sapling inside, tamped the soil gently around its base, and watered it with quiet reverence. It was a Ipe Amarillo, a golden trumpet tree, the kind that blooms in spring with a canopy of sunshine, the kind Mateus once pointed to and called sky flowers. He sat back on his heels, hands resting on his knees, watching the leaves tremble in the morning air. Then footfalls on the gravel path. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew her step. Isabel stopped a few feet behind him, wearing the ivory dress. Not the faded one from the gala, but a new one, cut in the same simple style, as if to say, "I remember who I was, but I'm not trapped there." She said nothing. She just walked forward, knelt beside him, and placed her hand over his, muddy, calloused, real. "You planted it," she said softly. "I thought, if it grows, it'll shade the bench someday," he replied, voice rough with emotion. "For us, for the children who visit, for anyone who needs to sit and remember that even broken ground can hold life." She leaned her head against his shoulder, just as she had so many mornings since that night he stayed. "I wore the ring today," she whispered. His breath caught. He turned his hand beneath hers, and there it was, the golden band, gleaming in the sun, resting gently on her fourth finger, as if it had never left. He didn't speak. He just lifted his other hand from his pocket and slid his own ring into place. 2 circles, whole again, not because the past was forgotten, but because it had been faced. They sat in silence for a long time, watching butterflies dance over the marigolds, listening to the distant laughter of children from the center down the hill. No cameras, no audience, just them, and the quiet miracle of second chances grown from honest soil. Then Isabel spoke, so softly it might have been a prayer. "He'd be proud of you, Daniel." He closed his eyes, tears slipping free. "I hope so." "He is," she said, squeezing his hand. "Because you didn't just come back. You stayed. Through the hard days. Through the memories that hurt. Through the nights when you wanted to run. I stayed," he said, "because you taught me that love isn't about never leaving. It's about always finding your way back." She turned to him then, eyes clear, calm, full of a peace that had been earned, not given. "What now?" she asked. He looked at the sapling, then at her. "Now we keep tending. The garden, the children, each other. Not perfectly, but faithfully." She smiled, the soft, steady kind that comes after storms. And as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows and golden light over the reborn earth, Daniel Moretti, the tycoon who once introduced a new love at his anniversary, sat beside the woman the world had called poor, and held her hand like it was the only treasure he'd ever needed. Because in the end, love wasn't measured in gowns or galas, in headlines or holdings. It was measured in presence, in patience, in the quiet courage to kneel in the dirt and plant again. And there, under the watchful sky, with roots reaching deep and hearts finally mourning, he checked the garden. He checked on Isabel. He checked in with himself with grace. Then, on a crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted down like whispered memories, a letter arrived. Not by email, not by courier, hand-delivered, by a boy no older than 10, wearing a backpack stitched with suns and holding a sealed envelope with trembling hands. "S.U. Daniel," the boy asked, eyes wide. "A Mocha du Hospital Mandu Entregar." Isabel, who'd been arranging dried marigolds in a vase on the porch, froze. Daniel took the envelope. The handwriting on the front was delicate, familiar, though he hadn't seen it in over a year. "Larissa." He opened it slowly, heart pounding without knowing why. "Daniel and Isabel, I'm writing from the coast, where the sea meets the sky in a line so soft it feels like forgiveness. Today I held a newborn girl in my arms, my niece. My sister lost her husband last winter. Grief tried to swallow her whole. But she remembered your story. She said, 'If Isabel can plant flowers in broken ground, so can I.' So she named her child Soul. And I promised to teach her about marigolds, about silent strength, about love that stays even when it's hard. Thank you for showing us that endings can be beginnings, if we tend them with care. With all my light." Larissa. Isabel read over his shoulder, tears already tracing silent paths down her cheeks. "She found her way," Daniel murmured. "She always had it," Isabel replied softly. "She just needed to believe it was enough." That evening, as twilight painted the garden in violet and gold, Daniel walked with Isabel to the stone bench beneath the now thriving ipe. Its branches cast dappled shadows over the path where they'd first planted hope. He didn't speak for a long time, just held her hand, thumb brushing her ring, the one she now wore not as a relic, but as a rhythm of their days. Then he said, voice low, steady, full of something new, "I've been thinking about the foundation." She turned to him. "What about it?" "I want to expand it. Not with my name. Never with my name. But with ours. The Little Sons and Roots Initiative. Roots for the families who've lost their foundation. Sons for the light they still carry." Isabel studied him, the lines around his eyes deeper now, not from stress, but from laughter. The way he listened more than he spoke. The way he knelt to tie a child's shoe without a second thought. "And how will you fund it?" she asked gently. He smiled, a real one, warm and quiet. "I've sold the penthouse, the yacht, even the art collection. Not because I regret building them, but because I finally understand what's worth keeping." Her breath caught. "Daniel, that was your legacy." "My legacy," he said, turning to face her fully, "is sitting right here. It's every child who smiles because someone showed up. It's you, still choosing me, day after day, even when I'm imperfect." He reached into his pocket, not for a ring this time, but for a small velvet pouch. Inside was a single pearl earring. "I found its twin," he said, voice trembling slightly, "tucked in the back of Mateus's music box. I had it restored." He held it out. "Will you wear them both now?" Isabel took the earring, her fingers brushing his. She didn't put it on right away. Instead, she looked toward the garden, where fireflies had begun to blink like tiny stars returning home. "I wore one all those years," she said, "because I was still married in my heart. Now." She finally fastened the second pearl to her ear. Now I wear both. Because I'm whole. Daniel didn't kiss her. Not yet. He simply stood, offered his hand, and said, "Walk with me." She took it, and together, they walked the path they'd once lost. Past the marigolds, past the roses, past the bench where grief once sat alone. Now the garden breathed with life. Now, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything they'd rebuilt. And as the first stars appeared above the Ipe Amarillo, its branches swaying gently in the night breeze, two souls who had known the deepest kind of loss walked hand in hand. Not toward an ending, but into a tomorrow they were finally ready to grow. Together, because love, they'd learned, doesn't need grand entrances. It only needs quiet returns. And the courage to